It's quite exciting. We've come to lesson number 16, and now we are on Revelation 14. And it is a little bit, for me, it's as if I've missed a lot by not being able to present every lesson. I'm very thankful to God for my colleagues who step in. But at times it feels like it's a bit disjointed for me because I've missed some of the the material that was covered. But I'm really happy that I can cover Revelation 14. It is one of my favorite chapters in the scriptures. It's very relevant to our church, and I would say to a certain extent unique. But you see, this is the Bible. We're talking about the Bible, and the Bible was given to everyone to read, to study, to try and understand. And but I think that as far as the Adventist Church is concerned, this is one of the messages that we really focus on. I come from a very large family. I'm an only child, but my father comes from a family of 12, my mom a family of 4, and most of my uncles and aunts, they had lots of kids. So one day I was traveling with one of my cousins who is also Christian, not a member of this church, and I don't know how the conversation came to the 3 angels' messages. And I was quite young at the time, and I just mentioned, 3 angels' messages. And she says, "What is that?" So I said, no, that's a very important message. It's in the Bible. We're in the Bible. And for the first time then, it dawned on me that, sometimes we just take things for granted. Just because it is in the Bible, it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody is familiar with this message. So I'm very excited to present this to you again. This is a disclaimer. We can't really go into a lot of detail. I make because of the time, I make quite a number of assumptions in the sense that I assume that, especially lessons that I have not covered, that some material the material has been covered and some concepts clarified, but I'll refer to some of them even in this lesson. And also, this is an encouragement to study further, to go into studying the scriptures even after once we've covered this lesson. You see, covering the lesson, even that is not fair to say, because we'll not be able to cover everything, just the basics. So I hope that most of you have had a chance to maybe go through this lesson. And it starts with a beautiful story. Well, it's not it is a beautiful story of faith, but I'm sure it wasn't an easy experience for the person involved. It speaks about Sushil, and in that part of the world where he accepted the message of Christianity, how after doing so he suffered a lot for this. He was taken before the village elders, and he was asked to give up on his faith, but he decided not to, and he was tortured, he was humiliated, but still he stood strong by what he accepted as being the message from God. Now, friends, we do live in a world where, speaking about spirituality, speaking about religion, there are so many competing voices. And what kind of certainty do we have that which I read or I believe is necessarily, the truth? Well, we need to do our best in studying and trying to understand, trying to make sense of it, allowing the Bible to interpret itself. But then what I always say, the most important thing is to just live out that which we know. There'll still be certain points that we're not going to be completely clear on. When we are unclear, let's study a bit more. Let's read a bit more, but not with the fear that, I have to have all points right. Every single word that God said, I must understand it. Because I don't want to be deceived. Yeah, that's important. I don't think that should be the approach. I want to learn more about who God is. And these messages, the messages from the angels from Revelation 14, are given to the church and to the world. We'll see that, to the world, to the whole world, are meant to be given to the whole world as a message of love. Well, maybe the language doesn't always come across that way, but it is God's message so that we understand not necessarily as much, because maybe sometimes we get stuck on this one, what is going to happen in the end time, but probably to better understand who God is, so that we can stay close to him, hear his voice, discern his voice and his will for our lives, so that we can make sure that we are not deceived. So the antidote for deception is not necessarily absolute knowledge. Knowledge is important, but the ability to discern God's voice amongst the plethora of voices that are out there. Now, as we always say, I always use the slide, why is it that we're studying this? Why is it important? All these things that we study, we read in 1 Corinthians 10, in Daniel, when we studied Daniel, that there were lots of narratives, there are lots of stories, and those stories were given to us, and the lessons that were in there were given to us, so that we, for our own teaching and for us to know what God's will is, and also for instruction. The same thing happens and applies when it comes to the book of Revelation. And I like this, just immediately after the story and the introduction of the lesson, we have these words, which I think they're so important, because we're going to talk about the gospel. We're not saved by works, but by God's free gift. We're saved by Jesus and Jesus alone. And I love this. This is very important. This is the heart of the gospel. This is at the heart of what we should be focusing on. And of course, works are important in the sense that we need to make choices. We need to act in a certain way. But salvation comes only through Jesus alone. He's the one who paid the price to ensure our salvation. And then there is another very important thing that's mentioned here, because in the lesson, there is a beautiful section. I did not include it in the lesson because I don't want it to take time away from our study. But it says the following verses reveal God's purpose for your life, and we're asked to make a commitment, to allow God's will in our lives to be a reality. And, there are a number of verses that if you have the lesson, I think it would be great to go through. And it even has a section where it says signature and date. Now, friends, this is, it's not, sometimes we get bogged down on technicalities. But I think the whole idea here is that, when you put your signature down, that's something that you stand by. And I think the date is important, because in life, there are certain things, major events that happen in our lives, and we remember the time, we remember the date. Sometimes we even remember the hour. Parents will tell their children, you were born on this day at this hour, because that was such an important event in their life, the birth of that child. Or, certain things happen and then we remember it in detail. And I think that most of us on this platform, we've made this commitment to Christ. But if we haven't, I think for those who have not, this is an important step, to just take stock of everything that we've studied and say, okay, I want to commit to this. And then immediately after that, that's on page 5. So we're staying with the structure of our lesson. There is this statement here: Christ's second coming is described as a harvest of the earth. So there's lots of imagery, there's lots of symbolism. And the beauty of this is, as long as we understand what this means, and Jesus used agriculture symbolism quite a bit, because that's what the people were able to understand, that they were used to, not necessarily able to understand, but they were used to that imagery, that language, and that symbolism. So speaking about the second coming, it's described as a harvest. What does it mean? Well, when something is ready, it's ripened, it's ready to be harvested, to be consumed, then that's the end of that cycle. So there is a cycle here we're talking about. Sin started in heaven, and I've spoken about this many times. Then it came to this earth, and a new cycle of sin regarding this planet, this reality of ours is concerned, began. But then God says there is going to be an end to this, and the second coming is marks the end of that cycle. Right. So I don't have lots of slides for tonight. I'm just going to put up this slide, which has the messages of the three angels. So we often talk about the three angels. These are the three angels' messages, and we know angels represents messengers, all right, that bring us very important messages. The context of Revelation 14 is that of, right at the end of time. And I think it's very important to go straight into what these messages are all about. So in Revelation, in the first part of Revelation chapter 14, says here, in Revelation 13, you've studied about the Lamb of God standing with the 144,000. So this is what precedes this chapter. And then we come to Revelation 14, and the three angels' messages start from verse 6. So this is John speaking. Then I saw another angel flying directly overhead, and with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. All right, so now John sees this first angel in the three angels, amongst the three angels, and he's flying directly overhead. And the whole idea here is that he's at a place that encompasses, as we read later on, the entire earth. So this is something that's supposed to cover and to be heard in the entire earth. And then it actually speaks here of every nation and tribe and language and people. I'll come back to that. Now, let me actually deal with this. So it's all inclusive. It's supposed to cover every person, it is for everybody, all the dwellers on this earth. But the one aspect that I find very important here, that it's so inclusive, is that it is not discriminatory. And sometimes, some people may find themselves in danger of just assuming a certain message as being directed to them, as it is just for them, it is exclusively for them. No, it's like a secret thing, nobody else knows or understands. No, this is not the case. And in the past, I don't have time to go into this, but looking at the nation of Israel, the purpose of the nation of Israel, the reason why God called this people out, so to speak, or set them aside, was so that they could receive the message from God about the first coming of the Messiah, of Jesus Christ as the Messiah, and then share it, spread it across the world. They were supposed to share it with everybody and tell everybody God himself is going to come to this earth to deal with the problem of sin. But unfortunately, throughout the history of Israel, they got to a point where bigotry made its way into the ranks of Israel. And they began to see it as they were a favored people, a special people, the only people loved by God, and they began to regard other nations as the Gentiles, as the ones who have no right to salvation. And they isolated themselves. Instead of becoming the people to open the door for the coming of the Messiah, they actually shut the door as far as all the other peoples of the world were concerned. And it's very interesting how God cracked that door, in the case of the three wise men from the east who came and witnessed the birth. They were there to welcome Jesus into the world. That's an amazing episode, how God revealed that knowledge to them. And then, of course, later on, through what we understand or we call the Apostle Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles. He used to be Saul persecuting the Christians. The sect amongst the ranks of the Israelites. And then he became, through conversion, Paul, when Jesus said, "Why are you persecuting me on the road to Damascus?" And then he became the apostle to the nations. And through him, and then the ministry of other disciples, and of course people coming after them, the church became the spiritual Israel, but it was constituted of all the people who accepted Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. And you and I are part of that. So coming back, this message, and we're going to talk about what this message is supposed to reach each corner of the earth. And the message is the eternal gospel. The eternal gospel. Again, one word of warning. We have to be very careful to not be reductionists, or to think in a very reductive way or very limited way when it comes to the message. Maybe for some people, the three angels' messages is the message that we need to preach. No, the three angels are giving us the context, and they are giving us warnings, and they are giving us the basis for understanding how the eternal gospel needs to be preached. The message is the gospel. And the gospel is the good news. There is a question here, what is the gospel? And it says on page 9, making reference to 2 Corinthians chapter 5, 14 to 19. And I love this passage. It also speaks about God reconciling the world to himself. The gospel is good news that Jesus lived a perfect life and died for us. Is the gospel the message that Jesus lived a perfect life? What does that mean? Well, within the context of judgment, that is very important, because if you remember and again, I'm making a lot of assumptions, and I'm hoping that some of these bridges that I'm crossing, you are familiar with them. If not, we can come back to them. Just let me know. But when we speak about salvation, there are a few pillars of the gospel. First of all, sin. The wages of sin is death, Romans. Right? Everybody has sinned, with the exception of one person, that's Jesus Christ. I'm just here quoting, paraphrasing the scripture. Sin separates us from God, and sin leads to death. That's the the basics here. So Jesus came so that we could stand in the day of judgment as people without sin. On our own, we cannot do that. So that's why we talk about Jesus' character, his righteousness being imparted to us, given to us through faith because of his grace, so that in the day of judgment, what the judge sees is Christ's unfallen and with a life without sin, a perfect life that qualifies us for heaven. Often people, I think they don't really understand how this works. So and we're speaking in human terms, from a legal standpoint, if you've done wrong, if you've committed a crime that you are accused of, then you are guilty and you deserve the punishment. As human beings, we have committed sin. Even one sin separates us from God, separates us from the source of life. Therefore, we deserve death, we are guilty, and, we deserve to die. Now, Jesus comes into the picture, and he takes both our sin and the penalty upon himself, and he dies on the cross. So he pays the price. He pays he takes upon himself the punishment for that which that is required by the law. And then, because he takes that away from us through faith, he imparts to us his perfect character. So when you and I stand before the judgment, symbolically speaking, the Father looks and sees Christ's character that's been imparted to us. And then he says, okay, you are without sin. Speaking about Christ's character imparted to us. Therefore, you are righteous. You have the right to eternal life. I hope I explained it. I tried to explain it as clearly as I could. So this is the eternal gospel. The eternal gospel is also that the whole context of sin, Christ coming in, and what I've just explained. Now, this message needs to be preached to every nation, tribe, language, and people. There are different nuances to the message. The message also includes lots of things, obedience to God, which also means, that we need to be mindful of God's commandments, that which He instructed us to do, so that we stay close to Him. And this is very important. Obedience doesn't grant us salvation. Obedience means loyalty to God, which in other words is our faith through which this transaction takes place, where we are imparted Christ's sinless character. All right, so this is very important. All right, that was a mouthful. Now we come to verse 7. He sees John sees this angel, and the angel has this gospel, right? The eternal gospel, in the sense we're going to come back to eternal and forever. Eternal in the sense that it has eternal implications. It has internal implications. It's not going to have eternal application, because there will come a time when sin will be done away with, and then the preaching of the gospel will not be necessary anymore. But its implications, the results, the consequences of it all, they are of an eternal, it has eternal application. And we'll come back to that a little bit later on. Verse 7, and he said with a loud voice, as far as this gospel is concerned, preaching it to the whole nation, opening the way for that, says, fear God and give Him glory. This is from the start a very paradoxical statement. I don't know, in your experience, can you fear someone and still give that person glory? And I remember as a child, I feared my dad. And it wasn't just, we're going to talk about it, it's respect. It wasn't just because of respect. I was fearful of him because I knew if I did something wrong, he would punish me. I don't think there was another person in my childhood that I thought more highly of than my father. So in a way, I gave him glory. In my mind, he was the best. There was no one else like him. But fear God, give Him glory. We'll come back to this. Why? Why should we do this? I mean, wasn't God supposed to be feared, and wasn't God supposed to be given glory to throughout the history of the world? Yes, of course. I mean, if you read the Old Testament and the New Testament, then you'll see that there is always this aspect of God needs to be feared, and God needs to be respected, and we need to give glory to Him. He's the only one who deserves glory. In this particular case, as far as the context of Revelation is concerned, and as this angel carries this eternal gospel, and that's supposed to be preached and proclaimed, as the passage says, to all those who dwell on this earth, at this moment in the end time, it is very important to do this, because the hour of His judgment has come. The Bible spoke a lot about a judgment that were to come. But now, as we studied the book of Daniel, as we studied Revelation, as we studied the prophetic time of 1,600 days, and as we went into all these details, we came to understand, as we've said previously, that as from 1844, that was the beginning of the end of time. And it was marked by the start or the beginning of the investigative judgment. Now, I'm going to say something here, which I hope that you will, we will all be able to grasp it. Maybe for some of you, it will be a new idea. I don't necessarily think it is, but let's see. The hour of his judgment. So this expression can be taken in two different ways, maybe more, but two that I want to focus on. It is God who brings about the judgment. Therefore, it is his judgment. It belongs to him. He decides when it happens. God knows the hour and the time. He sets things into motion for whatever reason. Don't ask me why, but God set that time aside. From this time onward, now something special is happening in the heavenly sanctuary. There's a special work of judgment. The investigative judgment has begun. So because he is the initiator, it belongs to him. But there's another nuance to this. And I'll try to explain it as clearly as I can because I don't want to be misunderstood. So during the investigative judgment, the lives of the righteous will be brought before the entire universe. And there will be a case made in favor of each of the righteous people. All right? There will be the accuser of the brethren will say, he sinned, she sinned, they deserve to die. And then the books will be open, and the case of each person will be presented. I'm trying to explain it as simply as I can. And then in the end, it will be proven that these individuals have sided with God, that they've been loyal to God, and that therefore they deserve salvation. But in a way, it will not necessarily be, it won't be the person themselves, the people themselves that will be justified, but in a way it will be God himself will be justified. You see, from the start, the devil tried, and he still does this, he tried to mar God's image before everyone, the unfallen universe, and before you and me, to make us doubt God, to make us doubt his love towards us, to make us doubt his fairness. I'm sure that you've heard people saying, maybe we ourselves at one time said it, this is not fair, God. God is not fair. This is not fair. And maybe we didn't really use the words God is not fair, but that's what we meant. And during this period, during this judgment time period, the investigative judgment, 1844 until the second coming of Jesus Christ, God himself, in a way, is judged. The unfallen worlds and the unfallen angels, they are watching in to see whether God has acted justly, fairly, or not. Not just with grace, not just with love, but with fairness. So in a way, it is his judgment in that way as well. Now, I'm going to close this incursion, and I want to come back to, again, very key words or keywords in the first angel's message. Fear God, give him glory, and worship him. The time is critical. The time of judgment has arrived. We need to make decisions, and we are encouraged to make a decision for God, not against God. All right? And it is a message that's given to the whole earth. And then it says here, we are called to focus, and everything, the first angel's message focuses on God. We are invited to do certain things, but the focus is God. All right? Fear God, give God glory. God's judgment has arrived. Worship God, because God made everything that exists. And I want to come back to these three key words: fear, glory, give glory, and worship. What does it mean to fear God? There are some explanations here again. I don't want to become too philosophical. To fear God means to give him utmost respect. We show that respect by giving God praise and honor. So in a sense, the lesson says that the first word and the second, fear and glory are more or less the same thing, giving him utmost respect. But I think there is something more. When we become truly aware of the awesomeness and the power of God, I think there is a sense of respectful, let me use that word, fear. We acknowledge that he is powerful. We acknowledge that he is in control. We acknowledge that he is the one who can do, um, great good, but he can also cause certain things that will be less pleasant. I'm not going to come to the three angels message, and the language there is quite um, harsh, we would say, for these very politically correct times that we're living in. All right, so when we truly understand, in a sense that, you can't play with God. We can't fool God. We can't pretend. Sometimes, we can lie to ourselves. We can lie to the people around us. We can deceive them, make them think that we're all that or whatever. But we could never do that to God. God knows it all. And there should be a sense of not just awareness, but fear. God is someone you don't play with. But then that's the first, and that's why I think the order is quite important. That's the first absolutely normal feeling that comes through, And I think I'm going to say something again that maybe I hope you understand. I think if we have not yet experienced what it means to fear God, and I'm not diluting this word or trying to just put it in no, truly fear God. Be fearful of him in some sense, then I don't think that we've really known him. We've really come to understand how terrifying he can be. I mean, think of Daniel, think of all the other people who've had the revelation of God, and they fell to the ground in fear because they realized, wow, I think sometimes we just think of God some people think of him the same way some people think about Santa Claus. This character that's always so jolly, and he's there for us, and he'll always be there for us. God loves me, that God will take care of everything, and so on. I'm not saying he won't, but there is an element of that we need to understand. You don't play with God. But then that's the first phase, and I think we need to outgrow it very quickly, because the moment we understand that this fearful God is on our side, that this fearful God loves us, that all his power, and we're going to talk about wrath, and will be directed against anything and anyone trying to hurt us, that he is our shield, that his majesty is there for our salvation, then we truly will have the sense of giving him glory. And that glory is manifested through true worship. When you just, I've sometimes there are certain expressions that have become cultural, even when it comes to my own culture, where people, sometimes it's a greeting, praise God, or whatever, something happens, oh, thank God. And there are individuals who don't even believe in God, and they use this expression. Oh, I won the lotto, thank God. I got this job, oh, thank God. Thank God the storm didn't come our way, whatever, in a way that doesn't necessarily mean anything. But when we understand who God is and we give him glory, then there is no way we're not going to worship him. And I want to pause here. Sometimes we enter into our churches, into all the buildings where we come to worship God, or we open the scriptures and we kneel down to pray. Are we truly aware of whose company we are seeking? Are we truly aware of whose presence we invoke? And how, if we are, all our attitude and our thoughts and our hearts should be completely immersed in what we call worship. Again, an appreciation, an awareness of his presence, a thankfulness that he is on our side because we want to be on his side, that he is a God who cares for us, that he's someone who is able to be there for us, to bring about peace when we're troubled, to give us patience, to wait when things are tough, knowing that light comes in the morning, to have that assurance. Friends, I think that Unfortunately, too often we take this word worship very lightly, not really understanding what it means. We could go to church and sing the hymns, listen to the sermon, even preach the sermon, do a wonderful prayer from the front because you see the spotlight is on me, and then go home without having worshipped. And there could be someone there walking just, fearfully and humbly, sitting in the corner in the church, so overwhelmed by the presence of God, so immersed in what it means to worship God, that they leave that place without saying one word, that they've truly worshipped. I think we really need to understand. I don't think we can worship God without fearing him and without giving him glory. Okay, I need to move on. Verse 8, another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, she who made all nations drink the wine of the passion of her sexual immorality." And now, friends, if someone off the street without any kind of knowledge of the scriptures takes up this verse, and opens the Bible and comes to this verse, I think there will be complete confusion and misunderstanding. Because they'll, read about Babylon. Oh, this is a kingdom, long time ago. Oh, sexual immorality. What's the Bible talking about here? This is, what is it saying? Who is committing adultery with whom? And it would be a picture completely, but remember, we're dealing with symbolism. And I'm sure that this has been explained in the previous lessons, what Babylon represents. And here in the lesson it says, on page 12, as we previously learned, Babylon in prophecy represents religious confusion. And I hope that you've gone into the history of the Christian church. And we talked about this as well when we studied one of the lessons, where we said how error and pagan teachings came into the church, and how some of them were converted to Christianity. They're just renamed. And when it comes to their worship, when it comes to a number of other things, all right? And in Bible prophecy, Babylon represents this confusion, this spiritual confusion, this religious confusion. And the message, because the hour of his judgment has come, the message is, and we're going to come to that, we need to come out of it. But right here, the invitation will be later on in one of the chapters in Revelation that, another message is come out of it, come out of Babylon. But here is just a statement. This conglomerate, this religious, and we're talking here in terms of Christianity, this corrupted Christian teachings, it's fallen. But fallen in what way? Babylon, by definition, represents confusion. So probably it's been fallen all along. From the start, when it began to compromise on the principles and teachings of God, it began to fall, and it was fallen. But right now, the third angel's message says, listen, here, this is the entity on the stage of all the main players at the end of time. This is the one you don't want to put your money on. All right? This is what the failure is. And this is where God is not. Why? Because she here, and it speaks here about, again, in the lesson, it refers to Revelation 17, still to be studied, which pictures Babylon as an immoral woman, making reference to Revelation 12, which we studied together, which is the pure woman. All right? And that's why it refers to she who made all nations, so it is spread all across the world, drink the wine of the passion of a sexual immorality. So whenever in the Old Testament, whenever God whenever Israel flirted with and compromised with pagan worship, when they allowed pagan worship, Baal and all the others, to take the place of the Israelites worshiping God and God alone, God would call that a betrayal. And he would say, you have committed adultery from a spiritual point of view. So in other words, God would say, you have been disloyal to me. We are in a covenant together. And again, later on, we'll see that the church is also portrayed, and Jesus portrays the church as a bride in some of the parables. And Jesus portrays the second coming as a wedding, when the groom, God, comes to take his bride, the church, the relationship to be reestablished with humanity, and the covenant to be reestablished for eternity. And sexual immorality in this particular context speaks about this compromise on the purity of God's principles and teachings. All right? So, first angel, eternal gospel to be preached to everyone, critical moment, his judgment has come, and within the context, the focus needs to be on God. Second angel's message, be careful for your focus not to be on Babylon, on this religious confusing entity at the end of time. All right, because this is not where you want to put your money on. This is not where you want to find your loyalty resting with at this time. And why? Because they have committed sexual immorality from a spiritual standpoint. And then the third angel's message is a little bit harsh, right? And that's why I said it may not be politically correct to use some of that stuff, but hey, this is what that's how John portrayed that which he received from the angel. A third angel followed, saying with a loud voice, and this is a warning: if anyone worships the beast and its image and receives a mark on his forehead or on his hand. Now, about the mark of the beast, I don't know if you've spoken, if the teaching has been given. And maybe, Diane, sometimes you need to have we covered this, because this will have to be covered, I think, separately. But when it speaks about the mark of the beast on the forehead and his hand, there is a comparison here that is made with the seal of God. And it is within the context of, creation. God has created everything. He is the creator. On the seventh day, he rested. So part of this whole confusion, as I mentioned, there is also a day of rest. And most scholars within the church focus on the fact that this mark of the beast is something that will play a very important role at the end of time, right? And now we don't have tonight time to go into that. I don't want to open the door, because then I don't want to leave it, hanging. We'll probably revisit it. But it's something that's been already part of Babylon's teachings. And it refers to a day of worship, all right? And the mark of the beast, in many respects, it's 666. There are all kinds of things people are talking about, and microchips that are, on the forehead and in the hand and so on. But it is a question of, remember what the first angel preached on, worship. Spoke about worship. We need to contextualize it within the context of worship. So it is a day of worship. We'll revisit this. But for tonight, all I'm going to say is that what the angel is saying, be careful where you place your loyalty. All right? There is first option, first angel's message, God. God is at the center. Second option, there are only two options, Babylon. Right? So now, do you want to receive, and then there's the warning. If anyone worships, is loyal, aligns himself or herself with Babylon, and receives the mark of the beast on their forehead, meaning intellectually, ideologically, and his hand as in action by our behavior, he also will drink the wine of God's wrath. right? We don't really like to talk about. We like to talk about God's love, but not his wrath. Well, the Bible speaks about God's wrath in the sense that there will be a time when God will destroy sin. Unfortunately, there will be those who will be attached to sin and they will be destroyed in the process as well. But look at the language that's used here. This person, those who are loyal to Babylon, in the end, and then this is also very important. Loyal probably is not as clear as worship. Worship, be completely committed and loyal to Babylon and to the beast. He will also drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest day or night. These worshippers of the beast and its image, and whoever receives the mark of its name. So, this is very strong language here, and God is saying, this is a warning. Please do not be deceived, and do not worship or allow yourself to find yourself in the end time being loyal to the beast or to the counterfeit, to Satan in the end. Because let's be honest, now you have God and you have evil, right? You have God and you have Satan. And Satan is very clever. He wants to pose as God. From the beginning, and we studied this, he wanted to be like the Most High. We studied Isaiah, we studied Jeremiah, we studied Revelation, we spoke about Lucifer, all right? And he is this beast that we were talking about. But he's got a different appearance. Therefore, there's an image, there's a projection. He comes across, doesn't want to come across as, I'm the devil. He wants to deceive people. And God says, just be very careful. There's one sign. You either have the seal of God or the mark of the beast. That's one sign. It's an easy thing. Why am I saying it's easy? Because when it comes to the day of worship, in the Garden of Eden, I always say this. What's more common in a garden than trees? Right? In a garden, you have trees. And God said, don't eat from that tree. It's easy to identify. It's part of the garden. And it's not necessarily the tree itself, but the action. I want you to either to show that you are loyal to me, that you worship me, that you listen to what I'm saying, that you are on my side. And the moment Adam and Eve disregarded God's command, they immediately, automatically positioned themselves on the side of evil and brought about sin into this world. Now, it is about a day. What's more common than, in a week than the days? There are 7 days. And God says, do not be deceived. That's just one of the signs. And it's very important that you don't allow those signs. You don't allow his deception to make you be loyal to him and therefore identify with him. Now, I want to finish this. I think this is very important. As I said, God's wrath, tormentation, being tormented and so on. And these are very strong words. But what God is saying here through John, he's saying, listen, there will be a time when I will destroy evil. And those who have been loyal to evil will be destroyed as well. That's how it works. That's why there's going to be a judgment. That's why loyalty is so important. That's why we have to choose to be on God's side so that we don't get to that. But friends, unfortunately, translation, and here, I am very aware of the fact that at times, it's difficult to explain this because as we read the Bible, it says, for example, here that, what the Bible talks here about is what in Christianity we call hell, right? So there will be a hell. If there's going to be a paradise, if there's going to be heaven, if there's going to be a place where there will be no more sin and so on, then there's also going to be a hell. That's the dualistic interpretation of a message of the scriptures. But and the hell, the way hell is sometimes presented is in these terms: being tormented forever and ever and ever. Is that going to be the case? And some people are really frightened by this. And I remember having a conversation with someone who came into our church. I had a sermon on hell, and I very rarely preach on hell. And I thought to myself, God, what am I doing? Can't I preach on something else? But that day I felt impressed to preach on hell. What is hell? That was the title of the sermon. What is hell? And then I talked about all kinds of things. There's hell on earth. Some people feel that they live in hell right now because of all the difficulties that they go through. But then I came to the point where I said, and I made a very straightforward statement. I said, I do not believe that hell is forever. And afterwards, this person came to me and he said, look, I'm not an Adventist, and I'm a Christian. I consider myself to be a very good Christian, but I've always been tormented by the idea of eternal hell, because to me, God just would be so unfair. Let's assume that, I've lived for, 50 years. There are people who've lived for 20, for 30 years. Even if you've lived for 100 years, and you've made their choice. If I chose, look, I don't want to be with God. That's it. I don't believe there is a God. If there is a God, I'm not interested. And he said to me, how fair would it be that for a life of, let's say, 70, 80, 90 years that I've lived on this earth, and I chose not to be on God's side, that God would torment me forever and ever and ever and ever. And not just, torment me in fire. I think every single one of us here burned at some time in our lives, burned our finger, or maybe some of us had more serious accidents, and how terrible it is to get burnt. And then this expression here, forever and ever, has made some people very, very uncomfortable, because in all the Bibles, that's how this has been translated. And how do we explain this? Why do I say that I don't believe in hell forever? And again, we don't have time now to do a study on hell, but I'm just going to give you one example. If we read Jude 7, all right, it's a very small book, right at the end of the Bible, just before Revelation. And there is only one chapter. And in Jude 7, verse 7, it speaks about Sodom and Gomorrah. And because of their sins, they've been punished with eternal fire. All right? And some translation says a fire that burns forever. So scholars have looked very closely into this. And when it comes to this verse, for example, they say, all right, first of all, Sodom and Gomorrah are not burning anymore. Archaeologists, argue, but some say that it's actually underwater at the moment. That would be quite something. But whatever, they've identified in the Middle East, wherever the place should have been, there's just not a fire that's burning forever. And scholars have looked at what that word means, or that expression, and it does not necessarily mean in the sense of action forever and ever and ever. But what it actually means is the same meaning as what we are reading here, eternal gospel, with a consequence that will last forever and ever and ever. In other words, sin will be dealt with, and through hell that fire will consume and destroy even forever and ever, in the sense that it will never ever appear again. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? So as far as Sodom and Gomorrah are concerned, the fire is not burning anymore, but the consequence of the choices that those people have made are eternal, in the sense that they have been destroyed forever. They will be resurrected, for the judgment, and we don't have time for that. There will be a third coming of Jesus Christ after the millennium, when the earth will be destroyed and then the world will be recreated. But the consequence, the result, will be eternal. Not the fire, the action itself. The gospel is eternal in its application. All right. So hell is eternal in its results. It will be destroyed forever. I need to finish. It's already 8 o'clock, but just think about it. It will be so painful. It will be so painful to know, and it is painful to know that even within our own families and maybe love people that we've loved or that we love, one day, let's hope and pray that we'll be there, but they will not be there because God will respect everybody's choice. Would you enjoy heaven in all that bliss, knowing that somewhere in the corner of the universe, in the sight of the Lamb and of the angels, there are our loved ones continually being tormented forever? Tell me, what kind of heaven will that be? We're not going to be like robots, not being able to remember or know or feel anything. And the Bible says that when we'll get to heaven, every tear will be wiped. It doesn't mean that we're not going to remember and maybe even shed tears for those that are not going to be there with us. There'll be time where we will have time to heal over this separation. Friends, there will be parents there and their children will not be with them. There will be spouses there and their loved ones will not be there with them. And that's not because God chooses so, it's just because God will respect people's choices. And God saves those who want to be saved. Now, let's not go and jump the gun and say, oh, that one is going to be saved and that one is not going to be saved. We're going to be surprised in heaven because only God knows people's hearts. And there may be people who have never gone to church who could be there. There'll be people from other religions. That's what I believe. Because God alone knows the heart. And Jesus died for everyone. He judges us according to the light that we've received. So doing these lessons, this adds a lot of responsibility because our knowledge increases. And the more we know, God expects us to do. So I find comfort, and again, there are more verses in this respect, that explain the whole idea of hell. And for me, this is very encouraging. This understanding, I think it's very comforting to know that this God that I serve is not a vengeful God, is not someone who finds pleasure in people being tormented forever. It is a God who is going to put an end to all suffering, to death, to hurt, to disappointment, by putting an end to sin. And also it is comforting to know that it won't be long, because the hour of his judgment has come. The end of time is here. We don't know how long it's going to last. I do believe God exists. I do believe the Bible is his word. And I do believe that one day he will come to make all this thing right. I also think that some of my understanding of, even the Bible may be wrong. Could be. But I want to be loyal to him. I don't want to be deceived. And as far as it depends on me, I want to make sure that I do not receive his mark on my forehead and his hand on my hand, that I do not allow, and even this idea, I would suggest this to you, even this idea of an eternal hell, I don't think it's of God. We need to be very careful how we read the scriptures. I'm going to finish with the 2 verses, and I'm sorry tonight I won't be able to take any questions because it's already past the time, but I'll let you think about it, and please, next time we meet, we will take some time. I'll open the floor for any questions that you may have, because it ends here in a positive note, and I want to leave it this way. He is a call for the endurance of the saints. Sometimes we may feel discouraged. Sometimes we may feel, this is not for me. Endure, endure, endure. And those who keep the commandments of God and their faith in Jesus, look how important God keeps on in the book of Revelation. this comes up over and over again and in a number of places and in different places in the scriptures, in the Gospels. Jesus speaks about keep my commandments. If you love me, God says, you'll keep my commandments. The commandments are important. That's God safeguarding our hearts and our destinies. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them. So death is not the end. Death is not the end. And as long as we remain faithful to God, we have nothing to fear. It's my prayer that we'll take this to heart. And if some of the things have been unclear, we'll pray about it, go and read it again, search a little bit more. And I'm closing with this. First angel, focus on God. He is important. Second angel, deception has already fallen. Right? The devil has already lost. Number 9, please take this warning to heart. God doesn't want you to suffer, and he doesn't want you to be separated from him forever. He wants you to be saved. And the last part there, even if death were to come before Jesus comes again, let's not fret. Our destiny is safe in his hands. God bless.